Hello, I'm Mike and this is Will. We are the Tabletop Donkeys.
Hello.
And we're bringing you issue 8 of Warhammer 40,000 Combat Patrol magazine today. This issue came with part 2 of the 10 Termagants and Ripper Swarm, so we can build those up and start painting them and see them in today's game. We'll be learning about charging into combat. But looking through the issue first, the painting guide for the Termagants and Ripper Swarm. So this is going to be the same as the other Tyranid units, starting with a base coat of Wraithbone, and you'll need multiple thin coats to get a nice solid colour. And then Baraknar Burgundy for the armoured carapace parts, again multiple thin coats to get a nice solid colour. And you might as well paint the Rippers as well. Do need to be a little bit careful with them just so you don't splatter the paint over the other Rippers as you're painting each one. And there you can see the models up to this point. And it does show the Rippers. They aren't normally part of the Tyranid Combat Patrol. There is an extra character you get as part of the collection that can make use of them, but otherwise they are there so you can use them in larger games of Warhammer 40,000. And then some more lore, this time on the Departamento Munitorum, the Department of Logistics for the Imperium, which is suitably vast. So the Imperium covers millions of worlds and thousands of battlefields, so trying to organise it all is a daunting task. So for some, the Departamento Munitorum is the saviours of the day as they deliver vital equipment, but for others you need to go through acres of paperwork just to order a single round or a single bullet for your weapon. So it represents the very worst of Imperial bureaucracy. But obviously, without logistics, you can't fight any wars, so it's the lifeblood of the Imperium, and shows you the symbol of the Munitorum there, and some cargo containers there in the background. And then we have background on the second Tyrannic War. So after the first Tyranid invasion, the Imperium thought that was the last, but it was a second invasion, spearheaded by Hive Fleet Kraken. Rather than a single brutal assault, Hive Fleet Kraken attacked multiple worlds at the same time, creating dozens of fronts, and it took the power of multiple Space Marine chapters to push them back. And there was at the Battle of Ikar 4, where the second Tyranid invasion was fought back, and Minus Calgar once again duelled the Swarm Lord as well, and was able to slay it and push the Tyranids back. But it wasn't only humanity that suffered at the hands of Hive Fleet Kraken. The Eldari of Craftguard Eandon were attacked as well, and roughly 80% of their population was killed. And no doubt we'll learn more about the Eldari later on. And the Tyranids are often called the Great Devourer because that's kind of what they do. They descend upon planets and consume all biomass on it, and then use the biomass to adapt to become even more proficient at going around and harvesting more biomass. So you have the 3 stages of a Tyranid invasion of a world. Initially the vanguard organisms will make landfall and begin assassinating key targets, and strange cults tainted with Tyranid DNA will begin rising up. And once they have a foothold, the main Tyranid swarm will attack and overwhelm the defenders with wave after wave of warrior organisms. And finally, once all resistance is destroyed, they will consume all of the biomass on the planet, which will be processed to create more Tyranids, and they'll head to the next world. And then the last thing to look at is the battle record for the Termagants. Once again, you can give them a name, keep track of when you've built, painted and played with them, and give them a little bit of background of the sort of temperament they have. And Termagants are the main bulk of the Tyranid swarm, with the strange flesh-boring beetles they fire from their guns. And then we have their data sheet, and it does make note of their patrol squads rule, because we'll eventually get another 10, so you'll have 20 Termagants, but you, in games, will probably be splitting them into 2 units of 10. And we don't get a data sheet for the Rippers. Hopefully we'll get one later on, but otherwise don't worry too much about not getting on. But now I'll hand you over to Will, where he'll teach us about some new rules and get into today's game.
So in this issue we're learning the rules for charging into melee, and then some more rules for fighting in combat. So starting with charging, this is how you normally would get a unit into melee. Previously all of our units fighting in melee have just started there. So to do so, first you pick one of your units in the charge phase, which comes after the shooting phase, and you pick an enemy unit that you wish it to charge, which must be within 12 inches of your unit. Then you can check the distance to see how far you need to move, and then you need to roll your charge move, which is a 2d6 roll, so you roll 2 dice and add them together, and that's how far your unit can charge. And to make a successful charge, it must get 1 or more models within engagement range of the enemy, which is within 1 inch of an enemy model from the target unit. If you can do that, then the charge is successful, and you can move every model up to the charge distance that you rolled, remaining in coherency, of course, at the end of the move. So there's an example here of a successful charge where the Space Marine captain is just over 5 inches away from these Von Ryan sleepers, and their charge roll is a 3 and a 2, which adds up to 5, so they can move up to 5 inches, which is enough to get them within 1 inch of the captain, so all of them move 5 inches directly forwards. But down here, this is a failed charge. They've only managed to roll a 4, which would leave them more than an inch away from the captain, and so their charge is failed, and if that happens then they don't move at all, they just stay where they are. And then assuming your unit makes it into melee, or if there are already units in melee, then you move on to fighting, which is in the fight phase, which happens after the charge phase. Units fight one at a time, and units that charged will go first. A unit that charged gains the fight first rule for this combat phase, and all of the units with fight first fight before anybody else, unless other units on the opposing side have the fights first rule, in which case you would alternate picking all of those units, starting with the player whose turn it isn't. So actually, if you have a fights first unit, it will actually get to fight even before the charging unit. Once everybody who has charged, or otherwise has the fights first rule, has fought, then you just do all the remaining units, again starting with the player whose turn it is not. And when you pick a unit to fight, it can make a pile-in move, which we'll see in just a second, and then it makes its melee attacks in just the same way as we have been doing up to this point. So piling in and indeed consolidating, when a unit is picked to fight, every model can make a pile-in move of up to 3 inches, and it does say here it has to get as close as possible to the nearest enemy model. That's actually a simplification of the full rule, but we'll learn about that in a later time. So for now, when you make a pile-in move, you need to get as close as possible to the nearest enemy model, and it has to remain in coherency. Remember that you do have to be in engagement range to actually attack, so this is a way to get a unit as close as possible to something that it's trying to hit. And it also mentions consolidation moves, so after a unit has fought, it can consolidate, so it makes exactly the same kind of move once again. Again, there's some more nuances to this that we'll learn later, but for now, it just means you can follow up into melee if some models have been killed, or move up to remain engaged. We'll see all of those moves in action in our battle report. So then we're on to our games. Ambush Predators. So the Space Marines have made several moves to destroy Tyranid organisms, and the Tyranids have identified a group of them now holding a defensive position and have set up an ambush for the Space Marines. So the board and the units are deployed as shown in this picture. We've got 2 of our terrain cards in the 2 of the central areas of the board. We have 5 Space Marine Infernus Marines down towards the bottom of the board, the 3 Von Ryan's Leapers up in the top left as we're looking at it, and then our new unit of 10 Termagants in the middle of the board. And the objectives are to wipe the other side out, although, as we'll see, the Space Marines don't get to do anything other than stand and shoot. And it does say in here that we will be ignoring the ranged weapons that the Termagants have and the Von Ryan Sleepers fights first rule that is actually on their data sheet, just to simplify things for this game, so that we can focus on the new charging and fighting rules. But the Tyranids get to move and fight first, and we'll be using the movement and characteristics that we learned in the previous issue. It does give a couple of hints here that leaving the Termagants in cover to start with is probably a good idea, and then move the Von Ryan Sleepers so that they're out of range of the Space Marines initially, because they'll be able to move up and fight in the subsequent turn. And also that, generally speaking, it's best to try not to launch a charge from more than 7 inches away unless you have to, because 7 is the average roll on 2d6, and so you're more likely to succeed than fail if your charge is going to be 7 inches or less. But once the Tyranids have moved, the Space Marines get to shoot and fight. They don't get to move in this mission, and they always make their attacks against the closest Tyranid unit. So if there aren't any in range or line of sight, they won't be able to shoot, and if they're in combat, then they will fight as following the sequence that we saw earlier. So in this example, the Von Ryan Sleepers have moved forward, but they're out of range, whereas the Termagants have moved out around the cover, but this has caused the Space Marines to shoot at them, and 7 of the 10 Termagants are killed. So then at the bottom there's a little hint for the Tyranid player that if you keep the Termagants behind the terrain so the Space Marines can't see them in the first turn, then they won't suffer any casualties, and we'll just put them in a better position to launch a charge in the next turn. And then we're back to the Tyranids moving again, so once again they will be moving, but this time they should be able to get rather closer, and then they might want to be launching some charges in this turn. And if the Space Marines are not engaged in melee, then they will be shooting again, but remember that a unit that's in melee normally can't shoot, so getting them engaged is a good plan for the Tyranids, and if there's any fighting to do, then they will fight as well. There is a fight sequence in both sides' turns, so the Tyranids will fight in their own turn, but if their Space Marines are still alive, then all the units will fight again. And continuing with our example, the Von Ryan Sleepers have now moved up nice and close to give them a nice short charge, and the remaining Termagants have also charged in. And then on the last page we have the usual victory outcomes that you can read if you wish, but we will get into our game and see what the Tyranids can do. Here we are once again back in our abandoned outpost. You can see the 5 Infernus Marines down the bottom there, the Termagants in the middle there, and the Von Ryan Sleepers up in the top left. We've added another piece of 3D terrain as well, just for a bit of visual interest on the armoured infestation site, you can see there. But the Tyranids get to go first and they get to move.
Yeah, so I'm going to play it a bit cautiously. I've moved the Von Ryan Sleepers up and they are just outside of 12 inches away from that one Infernus Marine, and then the Termagants are just going to huddle up against the terrain so they're hidden and they can move out next turn and get a nice short charge.
Yes, so it does go to the Space Marine shooting, but they're either out of range or can't see anything, so they won't be able to do any shooting, and they don't get to move, so we're back to the Tyranids again.
Right, so I've moved in now. Going to attack the Marines from both sides. The Von Ryan's Leapers getting basically 2 inches away with their 10-inch move, and the Termagants coming out from around the terrain. So they're probably about 2 inches away as well. So you can see they're measuring the distance of their charge. They're just over 2 inches away, so I will only need to roll a 2 to make a charge. I will roll it because I might be able to wrap around the back of the Marine squad, and that will allow more of the Termagants to hopefully get in. So it is always worth making the charge roll, even if you're guaranteed to get in, because you can't exactly fail a 2-inch charge. So rolling for the Leapers charge. They get an 8, that's definitely easily enough to get them in, and I might wrap some of them around.
So each leaper can move up to 8 inches because that was what was rolled.
So this one's actually going to go around there. I think the only requirement is that at least one of the models has to get within an inch.
Yeah, they need to be within an inch to actually fight.
Try and get into base contact. And then I'll roll for the Termagants as well. And they get a 9. Again, that's easy enough to get them in. I might even be able to get some of the ones at the back in range. So the Termagants finished their charge, and I managed to get most of them, or 9 of them, within an inch engagement range, even before their pile-in. This one at the back isn't in engagement range, so he won't get to fight, but I'm not too worried about that.
Yeah, and that's normally what a pile-in move would be able to fix, because, for example, if you had rolled a much shorter charge and only a couple of the front ones had got in, then with a pile-in move, the whole unit could move forward further. But in this instance, the one at the back is just basically physically blocked off from being within an inch of a Space Marine, so won't get to fight. But that's the end of the charge phase. Now we move to the fight phase, where everything that charged gets to fight first in an order that the Tyranid player wishes.
So I'm going to pick the Von Ryan's Leapers to fight first, because they are much better than the Termagants. So we have 18 attacks from the Von Ryan's Leapers, hitting on 3s. That's 15 hits, and they are strength 5 against toughness 4, so they need 3s to wound. 11 wounds.
So that's 11 saves that the Marines have to make, and Von Ryan's Leapers have an AP of -1 on their claws, so I'll need 4s to pass my 3 saves. Failed 5, so we'll be losing 2.5 Marines already. So 2 Marines are dead, and that one there has taken a wound, and I've taken them away from near the Termagants, so we will actually get to see a pile-in move, because they can be picked to fight next since they charged. So each model can move up to 3 inches, and they must get as close as possible to the Space Marines.
Yeah, so piling in, gotta try and get as many as I can. I think their bases are just over 1 inch, so they can't fight in ranks. That one at the back will be just about in range, and that one won't be. So I think that's going to be 8 being able to get in range.
Yeah, so looking at it from above, you can see that there are 2 who kind of just stuck behind some other Termagants, can't get within engagement range of 1 inch.
Termagants only have 1 attack each, and I've got 8 in range. And these hit on 4s, 4 hits. And they're only strength 3 against toughness 4, so they need 5s to wound. We've got 1 wound.
So 1 save with no AP, so they're needing 3+. Oh, but that actually failed, so they will take out the injured Marine. So the injured Marine who was in the middle there has gone down, which actually means that the Termagants get to consolidate as well, or we'll be able to show off what that is. So it's exactly the same as a pile-in move, they can all move up to 3 inches once again, getting as close as possible.
And the rest of the back are just going to have to sort of hover around.
But that's all of the units that charged who have fought, so remaining units now get to go, which is the 2 Space Marines. They have 3 attacks each, and I'm going to attack the Von Ryan's Leapers. These 2 could attack either unit, because both of them are within an inch of both Tyranid units, but if we could take out a Leaper, it would mean the dangerous unit being a little bit less so. So 6 attacks hitting on 3s. Getting 5. Von Ryan's Leapers are toughness 5 though, we're only strength 4, so we'll be wounding on 5s. Oh, we got 2.
2 4+ saves. I failed both, so they do wound 1.
But that's the end of the Tyranids' turn, so we're back to the Space Marines' turn. Obviously they can't shoot because they are engaged in melee, and you can't normally shoot while you're in melee. But we do go through the fight sequence again, but this time because nothing charged, and we're ignoring the fights first on the Leapers that they would normally have, we just pick a unit one at a time, starting with the player whose turn it isn't, which will be the Tyranids.
So I'm going to pick the Von Ryan's Leapers. So still have all 3 Leapers, so 18 attacks looking for 3s, 5 misses, so that'll be 13 hits, 3s to wound, not quite as good as the first round, only 8 wounds.
So some more 4+ saves with that AP. We only failed 3, so Sarge lives with 1 wound. And then the remaining Von Ryan's Leaper can consolidate into the gap left by that dead Space Marine. But now I get to pick a unit, so the Sergeant, who's on 1 wound, can fight back. We are going to try and kill that Leaper, who's on 1 wound. 3 attacks, looking for 3s. Oh, we only got 1 hit. Wounds on a 5. No. So now the Termagants get to fight.
So only about 5 of the Termagants can get in. Looking for 4s. They missed.
That's the end of the Space Marine turn, so we're back to the Tyranid turn, and obviously they don't need to move or charge anymore. In fact, you cannot normally move and charge when you're already engaged. So we'll be straight to the fight phase, where, again, because nobody charged, the opposing player gets to pick first, so the Sergeant gets to go again, and we'll try to finish off that Leaper again. 3 attacks. Oh, I only hit once again, needing a 5 to wound. Nope, failed once again.
So still got all 3 Leapers, so 18 attacks looking for 3s. There's only 1 miss. 17 hits. Turns into 15 wounds.
I actually have 15 dice out, so we'll just roll some of them. Well, actually, he failed only 2 of the first batch of 8, but yeah, the Sergeant will go down. So there we go. The Space Marines did not actually manage to take out a single Tyranid, and I think we'll leave it there. We've seen how charging and fight sequence works, and I don't think this is going to have a different outcome, unless the Tyranids for some reason voluntarily move into the line of fire of the Space Marines. And even then, it's just going to be killing Termagants that, as you can see, don't really have much of an impact in melee anyway. So we'll leave it there for this game, and we'll recap all of that for you now. So that was the game for issue 8 of Warhammer 40,000 Combat Patrol magazine. How do you think that went?
I think we've established that Von Ryan's Leapers are good against normal Marines. I think we possibly established that earlier. It is another tutorial game to get used to the idea of charging, and I guess a little bit of tactical movement. In a real game, obviously, the Marines could move. Realistically, they would move into range of the Von Ryan's Leapers and roast them, because the Termagants aren't really a threat if they can't shoot.
Yeah, I mean, as we saw, with a bit of careful positioning, the Tyranids have a really easy time in this game.
It is interesting how in the tutorial in the magazine they show the Termagants moving and then apparently not charging and just getting roasted. If you were really wanted to tie the Marines up, you could charge them a turn earlier, which would stop them firing their flamers anyway. They'll probably kill quite a few Termagants, but that doesn't really matter. It gives your Von Ryan's Leapers a chance to get in.
Yeah, if the Space Marines had been allowed to move, then the logical move for the Termagants would be to move as far as they can in the first turn and hopefully make that charge.
Yeah, because obviously units can't move when they're engaged, so the Termagants charge, and then when it gets to the Marines' turn, they won't be able to move. Charging and consolidating and things can be a little bit confusing, and there is a bit of tactics to it. What you saw me do is to charge in a way that let me get as many Termagants in. Models do get in the way of each other, so you do have to think a little bit about where you charge if you want to maximise your number of attacks, and there are some nuances to consolidating as well, but no doubt we'll learn those in a later issue. Charging obviously is a major part of the game. Tying things up in melee and fighting with good melee units is obviously very important. Charging something with an expendable unit can be a good idea, just to tie it up even if it's not expected to win while your real melee specialists get into position. Obviously we didn't see an example of a failed charge because the Tyranids were so close that pretty much whatever they rolled would have been successful. Trying to launch a charge from a long distance away can be risky because you do risk failing, so it's often a good idea to try and have a contingency plan in place in case a charge doesn't go off. The variation on 2d6 is quite large. On average you will likely roll a 7 or something close like a 6 or an 8, but can easily roll a 2 or a 3 on what should be a short charge, or you can roll an 11 or a 12 and get a long charge that would be unlikely. So it can be quite a lot of randomness with charging you need to take into account in your battle plan. Piling in and consolidation is usually most just about getting as many models into melee as possible. Yeah, and we also saw that you can take away any model in the unit as well, even if it's not one that was engaged. So when the Von Ryan's Leapers attacked the first time, they killed Marines at the other end of the unit because you wanted your Marines to fight the Leapers. And we got our new Termagants and our new Ripper Swarm. Yeah, normally the Ripper Swarm isn't part of the combat patrol, but we probably will be able to see them later on because of the unique character we'll be getting for the Tyranids. Well, it's not unique, but it's not normally part of the combat patrol. And Termagants I really think are meant to be expendable. You take them in big units of 20 or so, and they get in the way, or you use them to tie down dangerous things. Their guns are okay. I mean, they might kill the odd Marine with it, or other weaker things, and they are good for taking objectives, which you'll probably learn about later on. They are the chaff, the cannon fodder of the Tyranids, and that's exactly what they're supposed to be. They are literally expendable horde organisms. We get to see more of the whole swarm aspect of the Tyranids, and it's the little things that get in the way so you can't deal with the big things. And the models are pretty good. They're very similar to the old models. They're just replacing a slightly older kit. There's not all that much you're going to do with Termagants because they come in large numbers and they all look the same, so they're going to look fairly similar, but that's fine because it means that you have a lot of them. On the battlefield, they just look like a big swarm of bugs or something, which is exactly the kind of thing they're supposed to evoke. And it means you can also paint them fairly easily as well, because you can paint them all fairly basically, and it can still look good on the battlefield, just because there's so many of them. Yeah, and I didn't do some of the extra highlighting I did for the Tyranid Prime on them, or the Barb Gaunts as well. But anyway, I think that'll do for this video and this episode, so let us know what you thought in the comments below. If you've been getting these magazines, let us know how you did in the game. If you've been collecting the Tyranids, and let us know how you've been getting on with them and how you've been painting them. If you enjoyed the video, then feel free to leave a like and subscribe. We've been the Tabletop Donkeys, and we'll see you in the next one. Bye for now.